submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. The format that we want to cover in the next 4 weeks, there's basically 4 things that I want to cover. The one is the promise. On the left there, the promise of marriage, the purpose of marriage, the players in marriage, and the pattern for marriage. So that'll be the next 4 weeks. The reason why I've put it like that is the Bible gives us some very definite markers, and God helps us to understand his intent and his design with marriage. But I don't know if you've noticed, the Bible is not that prescriptive in the details of marriage. It doesn't say who should do the budgets, or who should pay the bills, or who washes dishes. Like, it doesn't say, like, let's go to that passage and, like, here it is. Here's the manual for all the specifics. And I think sometimes when we cover marriage, we want to go to the specifics. We want to, like, okay, just tell me exactly, what must I do here? How must I do this? But I think the beauty of God's word is that he gives us parameters. He gives us kind of like the boundary lines, and he says, if you stay on the inside of those lines, you're in the safe zone. And if you're in the safe zone, you're in a space where you can, with my protection and my design and what I've put together, you can find your way. You can find your way as far as the details and the specifics and the day-to-day. And this is why it's so important for us to realize, is because we're all different. Like if Antoinette and I come together as a married couple, I've got a personality, she's got a personality, I've got certain thoughts and ways of doing things, so does she. Like we've got to find one another now in the safe zone. But we're different to Jason and Linka. So they're different, we're different, but as a couple, we're also different. Like, we need to allow for the space to, like, find our way in all the details, but we do have some contours that God has given us. And we just want to cover those boundary lines and to say, if we stay on the inside of that, we can work out the detail with much comfort and knowledge that we are in God's ways and we are doing things his way. And as we find our way in the details of life, we can do it with a great sense of courage and comfort and knowing that he is over us. If you step on the outside of that, well, now you're going into a space that's not so safe. Now you're opening yourself up to a whole bunch of things that's unhelpful. And so today we will be looking at the promise, and we'll get to the other 3 over the course of the next few weeks. Okay, so here's the key verse that we want to look at today is from verse 31, where it says, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." You'll notice there's 3 things there: leave, united, and one flesh. The King James Version uses the word cleave instead of united, which I think is a better word. It's got like a little bit more to it, United, we just kind of, I don't know, think about a soccer team but there's something way more about the word cleave, because it talks about a gluing, like you come together in union, you come together in covenantal union. A cleaving is way more than just a little bit of unity between the two of us. You are united in a way. So you leave, that's step one, and that's important, right? Because when you leave your parents' home and you are joined to another, what are you doing? You're forming a new family. So new family means new authority. New authority means new responsibilities, new values. I mean, two people coming together, you got to work your own set of values. You can't just say, okay, let's flip a coin and we're going to go with my parents' ways of doing things. You got to find your new way. But it's with a new authority and a new responsibility, and there's a new head of the home. Everything starts to change. So leaving is very important. Now, sometimes parents don't allow us to leave. Sometimes we don't allow ourselves to leave. But when parents still fulfill a role of authority over the new home, there's a problem. If they take responsibility for things, there's a problem. Think of it even financially. We'll take responsibility for that. It's no, let them take responsibility for it. They must leave. Doesn't mean you're not there to help if there's trouble, but don't take responsibility. This is a new responsibility. It's new authority. It's a new family. So you need to leave. And then cleaving is this covenantal coming together where we exchange vows and we commit ourselves to one another for the rest of our lives. And then from there, we become one flesh, where there's this common horizon, and we share dreams, and we have this amazing life to live out, where we get to have kids, and that's where intimacy, physical intimacy, becomes a part of marriage. So you can see God has an order. Leave, cleave, one flesh. If you turn that upside down and you say, well, let's do one flesh before I've even left the house, or I might leave the house, but before I cleave, before I actually commit myself in covenantal union, I'm going to go to one flesh. You got God's order wrong. And somehow people think, I can still have God's blessing over my life. No, you can't. I mean, God is much greater than all of our faults. And His blessing is there for our lives. But we must be very careful to think, I can live my life in whatever way I want. And I'll just, kind of snap my fingers and God's blessing will flow. No, God's blessing comes with His order. And so He's given us an order. And so we want to follow His order. And we want to do things in the way that He has given it to us. And so we have this coming together in covenantal union. And the definition, as far as what covenant means, is a lasting and sacrificial commitment to the good of another. That's what it is. It's lasting because there's no expiry date. It's not like, I give myself to you and I promise to you and we're exchanging vows, but we're going to have like a 20-year, gig. And then we'll see how things go and we'll decide whether we're going to renew it or not. No, it's still death to us part. It's a forever commitment. You're not going to hey, let's just do it for a period of time and see how we go. You might be thinking in your head, but that's not covenant. I think a lot of the world today is oh, well, we'll give it a go, but if it doesn't work, we'll just end it. No, that's not covenant. Covenant is for the rest of our lives, we are committing ourselves to one another in a sacrificial way, in a lasting way. And it's definitely way more decisions and actions than it is feelings and emotions. And this is where we get tripped up very quickly, because we're a feelings people. We love feelings. Everything must be about our feelings. That's not going to work. You're not gonna do well in marriage when you make it about feelings and emotions. You'll do well in marriage when you make it about the decisions that you're making, because you decide to get married. You decide to exchange vows. You decide to commit yourself for the sake of the other, for the good of the other. That's a decision that you make, and then you follow it through with actions. And when you do, feelings will flow. But when you make it the other way around, well, you're going to be disappointed really quickly. And then you're not making me happy anymore. I don't really love you anymore. As if love is like something that you fall into, like a pothole or something. Like it's not that. You decide, and then you act. And so it's established in a promise. You establish it in a promise. That happens on a day when you get married with ceremonial vows. And then you express it, as in you stay true to it for the rest of your life. When you think of it in that way, you start to think a little bit differently about your wedding day. I'm talking to those who are now moving towards their wedding day. Sometimes the ceremony is like one of those things, like just a necessary thing that we want to get out of the way, like tick. And then we're going to go have a party. We're going to celebrate. That's where the wedding is about the exchanging of vows. That's what you actually are getting together for. It's the part that people spend the least amount of money on and do the least amount of prep on, but it's the most important part of the day. And so you do it on that day, and then you stay true to it for the rest of your life. So I promised. And that takes something, because, when we get married, we're young. And there's attraction, and, we're really keen for this. And then, life happens, and things change, and you're not the same anymore, and seasons and circumstances. I mean, you could start off as Barbie and Ken, but give it 20 years, you Barbie and double Ken in no time. You're just not the same person that on the wedding day. So with all of the changes that happens in life, you need to on this day say, I'm committing to you in this way, sacrificially and lasting, and I'm exchanging vows in a way where I'm committing myself to this, I'm promising. And then for the day after that, you stay true to what you said the day before. And the day after that, you stay true to what you said 2 days before. And so you keep going. Now you're just staying true to what you said you would do. In some way, I want to say, if we all just did that, we wouldn't have to talk about anything else as far as marriage is concerned. We wouldn't have to, if we all just 100% sorted. I promised to love you in that way, and I said I would, and then I do, and I do, and I keep I do, and every day is a new I do. And so, what's the problem? We wouldn't have problems. It's when selfishness kicks in, and we forget the promises that we've made, and we start to live for our own sakes, that the problems start to happen. And basing it all on feelings and emotions and what you doing for me and what am I getting out of this, and then we've lost our way. But if we just got it right, if we just said, this is what we said we would do, and we committed ourselves to it, and we promised, and then you stay true to your word, we'd all be fine. There wouldn't be a marriage problem. We would save ourselves so much heartache, so much difficulty. So when you think of covenant in the Bible and in ancient times, it was quite a thing that they did. The ceremony, let's just say, I think we're getting it quite lightly nowadays, the way in which we do it. But I'm going to ask Antoinette just to join me up here, just to demonstrate what covenant was in ancient times. So there would be the ceremony with a whole bunch of witnesses, right? And so they would start by taking their belts off. We're just going to enact this. And then they would give one another their belts. And what that would basically be saying is, my ability to protect you and to defend you and to keep you is what I'm giving you. Because the swords and whatever was attached to the belts. So they would start by giving their belts to one another. Then they would take off their robes, and they would give one another their robes. You're doing very well. And the robe was pretty much a sense of like identity, who I am. And who I am giving to you. Okay? Then they would exchange names. So something of my name would be given to Antoinette, and something of her name would be given to me, and we'd be like sharing names. And from there, they would go into this covenant-cutting ceremony or process where they would take an animal and they would cut it down the middle, but like that, down the middle. 2 halves, okay? And they would put one half on that side and the other half on that side. And it would be something of an incline, like where they would like almost be in a little bit of a valley, and then the blood from those animals would basically flow down to the middle where they were standing. Gotta love the Bible. And we have it so tame nowadays. I mean, the heart should be the same, but what they did was it was quite incredible. So they would then stand in the middle, and then they would be like back to back, and they would walk around the half of the animal and basically come back to face one another over here. But when they did this, they would say out loud for everyone to hear, if I break this covenant, may what's happened to this animal happen to me. This is how deep and how lasting the covenant-cutting process was. I mean, that's commitment, right? Now we're saying it in front of a whole bunch of people. So, like, if I break the covenant, just do to me what's happened to this animal. It's basically what they're saying. And it would be in this figure 8. Did you see that? Which stands for? Yeah, it's like there's no end to it, infinity. They would also cut their palms, and they would hold hands, which is where shaking of hands comes from. And in the holding of the hands, their blood would intermingle. How beautiful is that picture? All the medical people are like freaking out right now. And so this oneness was taking place. Like we joined. And then they would take wood ash and they would put it into that scar or the wound so that it would leave a very prominent scar. It wasn't for medicinal purposes. It was like, we want a scar. And basically that was to show, I mean, you would see it often, right? And it would remind you that you're in covenant. And it would be something that you could show other people. I'm in covenant. If you take me on, you're not just taking me on, you're taking on my covenantal partner. And so this scar would be very prominent in the process. They would plant a tree, and then they would take the blood from the sacrificed animal, and they'll sprinkle it on the tree. And then they would have a meal, and they would have bread and wine, and to end it off. And I mean, you can see all the parallels, right? If you think of marriage ceremonies today, not as graphic, a little bit cleaner. And I think in many ways we've moved on and made weddings about a whole bunch of other things. And let's cut the cake and throw the garter. Like whatever. It's like you can do that. That's fine. There's no prescription around like what you can do and can't do. But in moving to all those things, we start to lose some of the essence of what that marriage covenant actually is. But you're certainly promising to defend. You're promising to protect, to look after. And then we think, well, sometimes we lose that just by virtue of the words that we say about you. But like actually you've promised to protect. So you've taken off your belt. You've taken off your robe in promising, like I promise to give you all of who I am. All of who I am, I'm giving it to you. There's obviously the exchanging of the names, where the surname of the groom is taken. There's something of a sacrificial nature in terms of the promises that are being exchanged. When you think of an animal sacrifice that's taken place, it's sacrificial. Like we're actually saying, I'm doing it for you. I'm being selfless in this. I'm obligating myself to you. And then it's made for life. So the infinity thing. It's until death do us part. The cutting of the palms, we've missed that one, but we wear rings. Okay, so that's reminding me I'm in covenant, but it's also telling everyone else we're in covenant. And then our need for power outside of ourselves, where we're actually looking to Jesus, a redemptive power, is the planting of the tree and the sprinkling of it with blood. And then the meal, the bread and the wine, is like we just want Jesus to be at the center, because we know that around his table we will constantly find one another in a way that is gospel saturated and grace saturated. And so we enter into this marriage covenant, and there's aspects to the ancient times covenant that they entered into. But I think we lose sight of the fact that we're actually part of an even greater covenant that God has cut on our behalf between us and him. I mean, that starts way back in Genesis 12, where God enters into a covenant with man. He enters into a covenant with Abraham, who was the person that he used as the father of our faith. Like, he was the one where it started. And so he enters into this covenant with Abraham, and he starts by saying, I'm your shield, your very great reward. He was taking his belt off. He was taking his robe off. All of who I am, I give to you. I'm your very great reward. And then he says to what was then Abram and Sarai, I'm going to change your names. And I'm going to take something of my name, which in the original vernacular, Yahweh is YHWH, and he takes the H out of his name and he puts it in their name. Abraham, Sarai. And then it talks about the animals that were cut. And instead of God and Abraham walking the figure 8, God puts Abraham to sleep. He anesthetizes him, and he's sleeping on the side. He wasn't even part of the covenant cutting. And Scripture talks about a smoking firepot and a blazing torch. It's symbolic of Jesus. Jesus in his humanity and Jesus in his divinity that would cut this covenant on our behalf. And how he would walk around those animal pieces. And as God, he would say, if I break this covenant, may what has happened to this animal happen to me. And obviously God would not do that. But he would say it in his humanity as well. May what's happened to this animal happen to me if I break this covenant. And we all know Jesus never broke any covenant. He was perfect in every way, but he was representing humanity. And we, in our rebellious hearts towards God, broke that covenant, and Jesus became the animal that was sacrificed. The Lamb of God was slain for the sins of the world. What an incredible covenant. And you know, today he wears the scars of covenant. That's why he went to Thomas. He says, like, put your hands there. I wear the scars of covenant. This is true for all eternity. I love that is in Jesus' resurrection body. Yeah? So his resurrected body, he's got his scars. He still has it today. He wears the scars of covenant. And obviously the tree would signify the cross, and the sprinkling of the blood was his blood. And then he opens up this invitation to us, and he says, would you come and sit with me at my table and eat my meal? Let's have bread, let's have wine. It's no wonder Paul says, this is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. You see, when we live in covenant, we are living in a Christ-like way. And that's the goal of Christianity, is to be transformed in his likeness. What a beautiful opportunity God gives us. And, you know, you can be covenantal without being in a marriage. So for those who aren't married, you can still love covenantally. You can still serve, and you can still love, and you can still care for others and live for the benefit of others, which is what we find in church. It's called serving. You're welcome to put your hand up for that at some point. But we get to live out this covenantal union and be like Christ. And most of all, we get to do that with our marriage partner. What it's not a relationship based on feelings. You know, sometimes you watch these Hollywood movies and you see like weddings happen and then they're exchanging vows, but it's just like a declaration of present love. That's not vows. It's not a declaration of present love. It's a promise for future love. It's like, I'm going to love you on that day and that day. And the day that we reach our 80s and we're sitting on the stoep dunking rusks long enough so that it doesn't hurt our teeth, but not that long that it falls into the cup. It's for that day. It's for that day that we are today promising. It's a promise of future love. It's like, of course it's not about feelings. It's about like you've decided and you are acting according to what you've promised you said you would do. It's actions. It's not contractual. You know, if you enter into an arrangement or a partnership source or a relationship and a contract comes into it, it's very kind of like, let's just read every clause with the filter of what does this mean for me? That's not covenant. Covenant is, let's go through the terms of what we've just entered into because I would like to see what does it mean for you. It's a very different way of viewing it. So it's not contractual, it's covenantal. It's not consumeristic, where, you know, you've got this like vendor acceptable cost scenario playing out. I mean, if we have a cell phone contract and it costs me, whatever, 1,000 rand a month, and that's the service that I get. But if I can get better service for the same amount, or if I can get the same service for a lesser amount, I'm jumping ship. I mean, we all do that, right? There's no loyalty in, but like that's bargaining, and it's bargaining on the principle of what's right and what's fair and what's good for me. That's not covenant. It's not bargaining on the basis of principle, it's committing on the basis of a promise. And then you hold to that promise because you've committed. You're basically obligating yourself to stay. And it's beautiful and it's sacred. Out of all the horizontal relationships that we can have, it's glorious. And when you experience it, you see how glorious it is. So many years later, I'm more and more in love with my wife. She went away the other day. It's like 4 days. It was torture. Absolute torture. I just want to be with her. But like we're seeing something of the glory of what God has done, and that's not us having a great marriage. It's just the grace of God that has helped us and kept us. But if you stay true to the covenant, if you say I'm going to serve you and I'm going to love you and I'm going to act in a way where it's for your benefit, and you keep doing that, you see the glory of marriage flowing. And it's one of the greatest expressions of love. Because you know when you're dating, the first date, you don't really see any flaws in the person. I mean, if you do, it will probably be the only date. But like as you then go on the second and the third, and then you get to know one another, and then we like let our guards down, we're not trying to put our best foot forward, then you start to see, oh, there's faults here. This person is a little bit short with their temper, or a little sensitive around that thing, or like jealousy issues. Like these things start to come out while we're dating. But you get to a point where on the day you commit, but you're committing knowing that there's flaws. I mean, what an incredible expression of love. What a way to say, the fact that I know that you're not perfect, and yet I'm obligating myself to you for the rest of our lives. You don't get a better expression of love. Now, there's some people that would say, oh, I don't need a piece of paper to show how much I love you. You know what they're actually saying? I don't love you enough to bring the piece of paper in because I want to keep my options open. That's what they're really saying. So the piece of paper, this covenantal union, is this incredible expression of love. It's us saying, we're going to commit to you for the rest of our lives. Knowing that there'll be even more imperfections, and knowing that seasons will change and things will happen. I mean, Paul says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy. But then he says, for this reason, a man will leave, he's quoting Genesis 2, will leave his father and mother and cleave. So he's saying, in order for you to love in that way, covenant is necessary. You can't do it without covenant. Because if you're relying on covenant, you'll stay the course. If you're relying on your feelings and your emotions, you're not going to make it. It brings us incredible security and stability. You know, that's why the vows is for better, for worse, richer, poorer, sickness, health. When you're in your prime or when you're a prune, like it's covering all of life. You know how freeing that is? When people say, oh, marriage, ball and chain, you got it wrong. It's the opposite of ball and chain. Like all the pretense is gone. You can be completely vulnerable. You can be naked and be completely unashamed with this person that you have bound yourself to. It's a very freeing space. And with all the circumstances and seasons that change, my goodness. And it's God's institution and it works, which means he ordains it and he blesses it. And it's covenant that keeps it. So why it works is that covenant is the only thing that doesn't change. Everything else changes. The seasons change, your house that you live in changes, where you live changes. Child comes into the mix, everything changes. This is change upon change upon change. Covenant's the only thing that doesn't change. It's why it works. And, you know, God's design is of such a nature that when you love covenantally, you are loving by action and you are loving in a way where you are serving the other. Now, you might say that's a little bit mechanical for my liking. I'm wanting romance. Well, see how that works out for you. But what I would say is, if you do it in a way where you have committed, and because you've committed and you love by acting and serving, feelings will catch up with your actions. And you will love that person way more than you can love them on the basis of romantic feelings. I mean, think about when a baby arrives. Okay, so you have your first child. And for 2 to 3 years, it is one directional. All you're doing is serving. You get nothing back. Dirty nappies and like burps on your shoulder, and like that's what you get. Maybe the odd smile. But they're waking you up at night. They're disrupting your sleep. They're doing horrible things to you. They come out angry because they're just crying and like, And for the first like couple of years of their lives, it's like you are just serving them. But how much do you love them after those few years have played out? It's God's design. You love whatever you serve or whoever you serve. And so if we know his design and we live by his design, you will love your partner way more if you serve them. And that can kick in at any point in time. I'm going to give Antoinette an opportunity just to share quickly the story about her parents.
I love telling the story of my parents because I think it's just such a great example of bringing this point across. So they were married for about 36 years before my mom passed away. And at that time, their marriage was in a very good place, but it wasn't always the case. And I remember when I was about in high school, they really, really struggled. They would just always at one another and argue. And it was just, they were not in a good place at all. My mom also suffered from depression at one stage. And I remember one evening I was in matric, the word divorce came onto the table. And soon after that, I believe something happened that God ordained, or He allowed in His perfect wisdom. My mom broke her ankle, and it was really a bad break. She was bedridden for a couple of weeks, and she couldn't walk for, I think, 2 or 3 months. My dad, by default, became her legs, and literally had to do everything for her for weeks on weeks. He had to carry her to the bathroom and help her to get into the bath. He had to run errands for her. He had to drive her around. And slowly but surely something started to happen. They started to fall in love with one another again. And it was the most beautiful thing for me to see my dad's emotions and feelings caught up to his actions. And in return, my mom's heart just softened. And I remember she said to me at one stage, it feels like her eyes have been opened to this wonderful man she was married years ago to. And it was just beautiful to see how they just started loving one another. And this is the thing, we can't control our feelings, but we can control our actions. And about 10 years later, she was diagnosed with leukemia, and a year later, she passed away. But in that last year of her life, once again, my dad served her. He nursed her. He was by her bedside. He learned how to inject her every day. And you know what? I saw a love, a understanding, a unity, a bond like that will stay with me forever. It was beautiful to see until her dying day. And that is the beauty of actions of love leads to feelings of love. So my encouragement to you is to, when you think of your vows, if you're married that day, let that rather influence your actions than what you rely on your feelings.
So it can, at any point in time, you can realize, I haven't quite been living up to the promise that I made. But in that moment, you can say, let me live up to it now. And you can be 30 years into your marriage. Watch what God does. That's the beauty. That's the design of God. Like He has given us this incredible grace where we get to live out our Christianity and become like Christ and grow in a way where selfishness and self-interest starts to be pushed to the back, and we see this incredible covenantal life that we get to live where we are selfless and we live for the sake of others. Let's allow God's word to be something that it's not just us reading His word. We're allowing His word to read us. And when we do that, He shapes us, He forms us, He molds us, and He puts us on the right course where we are in that safe zone. And when we're in the safe zone, our marriage will sing. And it'll be something that is glorious. And it becomes the testimony to the world out there. Because, as Paul said, it is a profound mystery. And he's talking about Christ and the church. May our marriages model the gospel. May it show something of God's covenantal love. And may it draw people closer to Him.